It's fairly well known at this point that Riot Games subscribes, at least in part, to the ideology that sex sells. A good majority of champions released in the game, especially in more recent years, are designed to be what you might call conventionally attractive. Many of the guys are running around shirtless with washboard abs and toned muscles, while plenty of the ladies are out here in form-fitting attire that highlights their extremely curvaceous figures. Oftentimes, even if a new champion isn't sexy, they come in with the appeal of being extremely cute to make up for it. Now, character design is not my forte, nor is marketing. However, hang around in the League community long enough and you'll hear no small number of complaints regarding this trend in character design. How Riot barely releases any new monster champions, as they're called, and instead focuses in more on making characters that are eye-catching, to put it simply. It's the reason why champions like Kayle and Gwen, who in my opinion honestly have pretty good characters and stories, are so often harped on. They're seen as continuations of this trend that Riot refuses to break away from, based purely on some vague statistics that we mere consumers can never hope to properly comprehend. Honestly, the whole topic could be a video unto itself, but you've probably read the title of this one. Today, we're here to talk about one character in particular, one of the first and oldest champions in League of Legends, who's undergone one of the most widely frowned upon VGUs in League's history, from a visual standpoint at least. The Judicator, the Righteous, the Aspect of Justice, Kayle. Kayle made her debut alongside the game itself, all the way back in 2009. Our first glimpse of her comes from the original teaser trailer for League of Legends, though we wouldn't actually see her fully until the game's proper release. Now, despite what I said before, it should be acknowledged that League has always had sexualized designs, especially among its female cast. However, I believe that was originally more of a product of the time, given that women in fantasy settings being scantily clad was kind of just the norm for many years, and it still sort of is, but we're slowly breaking away from that trend. Kayle, however, was one of the precious few major exceptions we had back in the day. She was covered head to toe in golden armor that obscured her from view. Now, at this point, I will say that I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with sexualizing characters under the right conditions. Nor do I think that all female characters should cover every ounce of skin at all times if they aren't some sort of temptress or femme fatale. However, for a character like Kayle, this approach made her arguably one of the best designed champions in the old League of Legends. Which admittedly wasn't a high bar to clear, but clear it she did. After all, the concept behind her design is Avenging Angel, and I don't think anyone's going to disagree with me that a winged figure covered in golden armor and wielding a sword engraved with flaming runes fits that design perfectly. Okay, so technically Kayle wasn't actually an angel in the old lore, at least not permanently, though there was a short-lived version of the story where her people called themselves that. Similar to Asgardians in Marvel, she's treated more as a member of this ancient race that kind of seems divine, and her home realm was very reminiscent of what we might typically think of as heaven, but it was never officially named. Kayle herself was committed to a crusade against the vague and nebulous concept of evil, striking down the wicked wherever they were found, while trying to prevent the innocent from falling down the path of darkness. Now, you'd think literally fighting the concept of evil itself is a battle that would never truly end. But apparently, Kayle almost won, somehow, until her sister, Morgana, intervened. Morgana didn't care for her sister's crusade, and it seems that she wasn't alone. Morgana and those like her believed the crusade of these so-called angels was nothing short of tyranny, stifling freedom for their perceived sake of good and evil. Thus, a war began in this totally not heaven realm, with the sisters being locked in combat until they were forcibly summoned into the League of Legends, because summoners were so OP they could casually pluck people out of their dimensions once upon a time. So you probably see the obvious parallels here. Kayle and Morgana are obviously inspired by the infamous rivalry between Michael and Lucifer, with the latter in both cases being dubbed fallen angels. There's a whole discussion to be had about the biblical references, but even putting that aside, their old designs speak for themselves. Again, you've got Kayle here with golden armor, pristine white wings, and a sword that could ignite with holy fire. By contrast, Morgana wore nothing but a bra and a skirt, her wings were stripped of most of their feathers, and she fought with all manner of dark magics. Their designs were far from perfect, or even really unique, but they got the point across clearly enough. Then the Great Retcon happened, and the League of Legends itself was removed from the canon. Riot began the long process of slowly updating all the old characters to better fit the new lore and the world that they'd made. In 2019, Kayle and Morgana finally got their chance to shine with a proper VGU, as well as a major lore retcon. So, before we discuss their designs, let's try and give a brief synopsis of their new shared backstory, shall we? Once upon a time, the world was being ravaged by a terrible and devastating conflict called the Rune Wars, an element brought over from the old lore to the new one. The Rune Wars were so widespread that they even threatened to bring devastation to Mount Targon. And so two residents of the mountain, Mahira and Keylom, dared to climb to its peak in the hopes of seeking aid from the gods themselves, despite the fact that Mahira was pregnant at the time. Somehow, they both survived the journey, and Mahira was chosen as the aspect of justice. Basically, a celestial god made her into its mortal host to enact its will on Runeterra. Also, at some point, Mahira gave birth on the way down the mountain, so take that how you will. Anyways, it wasn't long before Mahira was fully possessed by the aspect, not unlike how Atreus was taken over by Pantheon. And so she eventually left her family behind to go fight whoever or whatever the god told her to fight, really. Needless to say, it left Keylom with a less than stellar opinion of the gods, so when he heard about a fledgling nation with strong anti-magic sentiments in the north, Keylom ran away with his daughters and never looked back. Unfortunately for him, it's not exactly easy to outrun a god, especially when that god is technically the parent of your daughters. Yeah, because their mother was transformed through celestial power while they were even in the womb, Morgana and Kayle possess traces of Justice's essence in them from birth. Then, a day came when the aspect decided to manifest itself in both of them, effectively dividing its power to create two new aspects of justice. This is the first and only instance in the current lore we have of there being two of the same aspect, but unfortunately it came at a bit of a price, and also the implication that its previous host had passed away. See, Morgana and Kayle wound up taking two radically different views on what justice actually means, and that would only drive them even further apart. Oh, and they also grew wings for whatever reason. I don't know. Celestial radiation, I guess. Basically, Kayle is a firm stickler for rules and laws. She believes that any sin or crime must be met with swift and decisive action, and that those who err must be punished for their crimes regardless of the circumstances. Morgana, however, believes in redemption, and that those who commit evil should be allowed to atone for their actions and be given a chance to repent. This disagreement ultimately escalated into a full-on battle, which only stopped when their father was killed in the crossfire. This incident caused Morgana to reject her divinity, believing it to be the cause of her family's strife, while Kayle felt that human emotion and ignorance was to blame. Thus, the sisters parted ways. Morgana shackled her wings and went into hiding, while Kayle soared to the peak of Targon in the hopes of fully embracing godhood. It's honestly a fascinating dynamic. Differing views of justice and a clash between mortality and divinity. As you'd expect, the sisters even got new designs for their updated lore. Morgana's is considered pretty favorably for the most part. Still dark and ominous, but more akin to a noblewoman's dress as opposed to just a bra and a skirt. Kayle, however, well, this is where things get complicated. Kayle's new design is probably the most controversial part of her rework. She went from a full set of elegant golden armor to bits and pieces of armor affixed to a skin-tight bodysuit. What's more, the armor she does have looks impractical if we're being honest. Now, I'm not one of those people who demands extreme levels of realism in all the media I consume. I can suspend my disbelief and accept characters having impractical weapons or attire in a fantasy setting. Even so, I honestly think that the old armor just looked overall better, both from a practical standpoint and from the rule of cool angle. Now, I understand that this is just my personal opinion, and if you disagree, that's fine. But we haven't even touched on the biggest issue yet. See, Kayle's rework gives her a gameplay gimmick that revolved around her pursuit of divinity. As she levels up, Kayle slowly but surely acquires more celestial power, sprouting additional wings and occasionally setting her wings on fire because why not? She even splits her sword into two separate blades, which is a pretty interesting touch. However, the most controversial aspect of this gimmick is that when Kayle reaches her final form, the apex of her power, with 6 blazing wings and twin shimmering swords, she takes her helmet off. So why is this a big deal exactly? Well, it depends on who you ask, honestly. While such a mundane feature might seem trivial to many, it's been a topic of heavy debate amongst the community for quite some time. Some hate the fact that Kayle's helmet comes off while others love it. Of course, there are those who are indifferent, but let's focus on the first two camps, shall we? The argument against Kayle's helmet coming off is basically that it goes against the point of her character. Kayle's entire mission in the new lore is to shed her humanity and become a divine agent of justice, an avatar of retribution who acts without letting personal thoughts or feelings get in the way. Obscuring a character's face is one of the oldest and most well-known tricks to making them seem inhuman. While we did know what old Kayle's face looked like thanks to League's second trailer, her bio explicitly stated that she hid her face to obscure how tiring her endless crusade was. It was a mask she wore in both a literal and figurative sense to hide her humanity. So many argue that new Kayle tossing it away directly goes against the main point of her character. On the opposite side, however, there are those that believe Kayle removing her helmet is completely justified. The argument I see in favor of this usually follows the logic that once Kayle has reached the height of her power, she no longer feels the need to hide or protect herself. She is a goddess, or at least as close to one as she can get, and wants you to behold her in all her divine glory. There is, of course, a bit of irony in that such a display of ego is quite human of her, though perhaps that speaks to how the aspects aren't truly as different from humans as they claim to be in the first place. To be honest, I think there is merit to both arguments, but the issue I have is that Kayle currently doesn't embrace either side fully. Ultimately, I think it depends on how you interpret the helmet and the armor in general. Are they a shell that Kayle builds around herself to mask her humanity, or are they a cocoon to be shed when she reaches the apex of her power? If you read it as the former, then I think it would make more sense to have Kayle add more armor as she grows stronger. Show her slowly covering up more and more of her human form until all you can see is a suit of radiant armor with several burning wings. have the suit encompass her fully, and make her voice seem more cold and dispassionate. Perhaps this could even symbolize that she's fully under the aspect's control, not unlike what happened to her mother. On the flip side, if you read it as the latter, then I think Kayle should shed more than just her helmet. Now, I know the idea of stripping down to just the bodysuit probably sounds needlessly sexualized, but just hear me out. If Kayle truly believes herself to be a god in this form, then what need has she for armor? What use has she for protection? You could read it as the armor becoming useless extravagance that just slows her down, like how Dragon Ball characters throw off their weighted clothes when they get serious. I mean, Kayle's ult summons a barrier that makes her immune to damage for a time. So all the protection she really needs is the aspect's power, right? Again, I think there is merit to both sides, but the sad reality is that Kayle's current design and mechanics don't fully embrace either. She's stuck in a weird middle ground with armor that doesn't hide or protect much, and removes her helmet for seemingly no reason other than to confirm that she does in fact look like Morgana underneath. I can't claim to know for sure what the design process was here, but it certainly feels like there is a bit of indecisiveness, and the compromise just feels half-baked. But what do you all think? Would Kayle's design be better if she were fully armored, or do you think it would be more fitting for her to shed it completely? Please leave your thoughts and comments down below, tastefully, and I'll see you all next time. Bye for now.